Hello and welcome to lesson 4 of JavaScript. My name is Mildred. In this lesson, we are going to look at how to create objects in JavaScript. But before then, let's look at what scope is and the different accessibility of variables depending on where they are declared on a page. Now, we said that we use the let, the const, and also the var keyword to declare variables in JavaScript. Before the ES6 version, we only had the var keyword to declare variables. The difference between these three, one main difference I have seen, is in terms of their scope. The let and the const can have a function and a global scope or a block scope. So when you declare a variable using let or using const here, and even with var within a function, you cannot access any of the variable outside of the function. These variables are said to be local to the function. The scope of the variable starts and ends within the function. And so if I come outside of the function and I want to print out, let's say, area, for instance, outside of this function, the system doesn't know anything called area. They only know there's a function called area cycle, and when you call this function, it's going to use all of these variables, but outside of the function, it does not know this variable. When I put area here and I refresh, nothing will be printed on the page. When you declare a variable using the let and the const keyword, you cannot redeclare or reassign these variables. You cannot declare the variable twice. But in the case of the scope of the variable, then you can declare the same variable twice on the same page based on the scope of that variable. For instance, we have used a let radius equal to x/2. If I try to declare radius twice, this function is not going to function. So when I try to return area circle, and I want the area of a circle whose diameter is 20, when I refresh, I won't have anything printed on the page because I have declared the function twice. You will get an error message to this effect that this is already declared before. But when I delete one of the declaration and I refresh, then I'm going to have my value printed because now I have no error anymore. So you can't declare it twice. But I can declare this radius outside of this, and it doesn't affect the function because the scope of this declaration ends within the function, and so my declaration can be twice. So this is how tricky it can get when you don't understand the concept of scope and the rules of declaring the different variables and where they are accessible on the page. Any variable you declare outside of a block of code or outside of a function is global, which means you can access that variable throughout the page. So a block of code is between the start and end curly brace is a block of code. If you declare a variable outside of a block of code, it has a global scope. If you declare a variable inside of a block of scope, it has a block scope. If it's within a function, it is local to that function. And so this is the concept of scope. Now let's talk about objects in JavaScript. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this object.js. In JavaScript, when we declare variables, we can only assign one value to this variable, but sometimes more than one thing makes up the value. We have several values for one variable. And so we have the concept of objects. I want to have several values for this person. A person is an object. The person has several properties like the height, the color, the weight, the age, the gender. There are several properties. Every person has these properties, but they have different values. And so when we want to declare an object, we will list these properties and assign values to these properties. The values can change for each person, but properties remain the same. Same thing like having a car. Every car is an object. They have several properties. They make the model, the color, the weight, but the values will differ. In JavaScript, we create an object using curly brace. Within the curly brace, we write the property names. Let's say I want to write this person has a first name. This person also has a last name. This person has a sex. This person has an age. This person has a height. I'll stop here. But these properties must all have values. And for each property, you use a colon. And in a pair of quotes for strings, you specify the value. For each property, you use a colon. And in a pair of quotes for strings, we specify the value. For sex also, I'll do the same. And I'll put the value. For age, I'll do the same. age is not a string, I'll leave it as a number. And for height, it's going to be a string, and I'll put maybe like 5, 7. We have declared a variable that stores an object. And this is how we create objects in JavaScript. The variable person holds an object. This is as easy as it is to create objects in JavaScript. Now you need this basic knowledge for us to build up into how we use this object in object-oriented programming as we go into the last weeks of the course. But for now, we are just trying to understand the concepts before we apply them to software development. I want to get the value of properties within this object. I'm going to access the values like this. Let me say let first name be equal to, I'll call the object name person dot the property name first name. And when I do document dot get element by ID, I want the element with the ID. Let's change this ID to object. With the ID of objects, your ID can have any name, they must be uniform. So dot inner HTML, I want to print out first name to the page. I have not included this page on this page, so it cannot find the JavaScript file that we are referring to. And so I'm going to try to get the object.js file, and when I refresh, I should have it printed to the page. You can also access the object by using square brackets. So I'll put person, and in a pair of quotes, I'll write the property name first name. Save, refresh, it remains the same. I want last name, I'll change that to last name. Save, refresh, and I have last name. We looked at operators and we said that the plus sign is used to add two numbers together. But when we use a plus sign between strings, we begin to have concatenation where we can merge two strings. Like I want the first name and the last name printed, I will use a plus sign. So let's say something like let first name be first name and let last name be equal to person dot last name. And then I'm going to be printing out first name plus last name. Now this will print out without a space between them because we just concatenated. When I refresh, I'm going to have first name and last name. If I want a space, I'll put plus space, and space is just by writing a quote plus last name. And when I refresh now, I'm going to have it with the space. A function can also be a value. Another object can also be a value. Let's say, for example, I want to have a full name property here, and I want this full name to be a function. So I'll call function like this. All we want this function to do is to return first name plus last name. And so we have a function as a value for the property. The properties are just like the keys to get the value. And so we have this function. And so now we can easily call the function instead of concatenating here and say we want this inner HTML to return a function called full name. So we're calling the property. But when you are calling the function, you must put, or you're calling a method within an object, you must put the brackets. It doesn't know within this function what first name and last name we use. There is a keyword in JavaScript we call this. This, when used in a method, refers to the object. So we're saying the first name property of the person object. That's what this means. And we also use the this not last name. So when we go deeper into object-oriented programming, we're going to look at how the meaning of this changes based on where it is used. So in this context of using this within a method, it always refers to the object. So this refers to the person object. This is saying the first name property of the person object. It is used within this object. And this time we have to call the full name with the object person.fullname. So remember that you must access the properties of an object by writing the object name dot the property name, or the object name and in the square bracket the property name. Now when I save this and I refresh, I will have this printed to the page. I'll go over this again. When you declare an object in JavaScript, you declare the object has name value pairs. You can have several name value pairs, all separated by commas. The name and the values are separated by a column. The value of a property can be another object, can be a function, can be an array. If the property is a function and you try to access without the brackets, it will give you the function definition rather than the values like this. So always remember to put your pair of brackets like this. So this is basically how we use objects or declare objects in JavaScript. You have to practice the concept of objects. This is the basic way of using objects. We are going to go deeper into objects in the last weeks of the lesson, but we need to build up our more concepts before we get into more advanced details about these topics. In the next lesson, we are going to look at how JavaScript reacts when events or different things happen with HTML elements. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.